Since 2019, everyone has accepted that Jeffrey Epstein is dead. It's treated like fact. Case closed, story over. But what if everything we've been told is a carefully crafted lie? What if Epstein didn't die at all? 2 weeks ago, I watched him walk through airport security in Slovakia. I know what I saw, and it shattered the way I looked at the world. But what if these clips aren't doctored, and someone powerful wants them buried? If you saw something you were never meant to, what would you do? The day it all started didn't feel unusual. I'd been at my desk, the same spot where I'd spent years, monitoring satellite feeds after leaving the military. Most days were routine, just me, a computer, and a steady stream of images to analyze. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary, and the hours usually passed in quiet repetition. That changed when an email slipped into my inbox. The sender was Alex Newman, a name I hadn't seen in a while. We'd both worked satellite surveillance together about a decade back. Alex was sharp, the kind of guy you could trust to spot a detail others missed. And even though we hadn't stayed close, there was a kind of unspoken bond from those years. The message had no subject, no text, just a single file attached. The name was generic, 1997_F0368. There was nothing about it that stood out, but I opened it anyway, mostly out of habit and a little out of curiosity. The video loaded, and for a second I thought it was some kind of prank. The scene was a bright beach, the ocean almost too blue, and standing there was Jeffrey Epstein. He wore sunglasses, looked relaxed, and seemed to be talking to someone just out of frame. I actually laughed, thinking Alex was playing with deepfake software and trying to mess with me. I sent him a quick text, something like, "What am I looking at here, Alex? Practicing your CGI skills." But he didn't reply. I watched the video again, this time paying attention to the details. The camera panned slightly as Epstein walked closer. The audio was thin, just wind and some voices in the background. But the way Epstein moved, the way he smiled, none of it felt forced or artificial. I'd seen plenty of fake videos, and my job had made me good at picking out the flaws. Lighting, shadows, odd glitches, those things usually gave fakes away. I decided to check the file using some of the analysis tools I'd used for years. I ran a quick scan for artifacts and inconsistencies, looking for any sign the video had been tampered with. Everything came back clean. No mismatched pixels, no weird shadows. The metadata said it was recorded in the Bahamas just 3 weeks ago. That's when it hit me. Epstein's death had been officially confirmed in 2019. The news had covered every angle, and no one questioned it. But this video was recent, and it was clear. It didn't fit with anything I knew to be true. I sat at my desk replaying the footage, trying to convince myself there was some logical explanation. Maybe it was a really good fake. Maybe I was missing something obvious. But the more I watched, the more certain I became that this wasn't a trick. I checked my phone again, hoping for a reply from Alex, but there was nothing. I even tried calling him, but it just rang and rang. The silence on the other end made me uneasy. By the end of my shift, I'd memorized every frame. The questions kept piling up. Why would Alex send this to me? Why now? The whole thing felt off, like I'd stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to see. The lack of response from Alex only made it worse. It felt like I was holding a piece of a puzzle that was never meant to be found. That night, I saved the video to a secure drive and checked my locks before going to bed. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd crossed a line just by watching it. Lying awake, I kept thinking about what I'd seen and what it meant. It wasn't just about whether the footage was real. It was about what could happen next if it was. I didn't know it yet, but the truth was about to get a lot more dangerous. What I found next changed everything even more. I started looking through travel records, just to see if there was anything that could connect Epstein to Europe after the Bahamas. I had access to some databases from work, so I searched for anything unusual. It was mostly routine stuff until I hit a passenger manifest for a private jet out of Nassau. The list was all initials, but one set, JE, stood out. It wouldn't have meant much except the destination was Bratislava, Slovakia. That matched the airport in the video Alex sent. The flight landed 10 days after the beach footage was supposedly shot. It felt too precise to be a coincidence. I tried to get more details by cross-referencing customs entry logs for Bratislava. I didn't have direct clearance for international airport feeds, but I could request archived footage if I had a good enough reason. The video was blurry, and the man wore a cap and sunglasses, but the way he moved and his profile matched what I'd seen before. The timestamp lined up exactly with the manifest. I watched the clip over and over, looking for anything that might prove it was a mistake, but the details kept adding up. I started digging through other records, just to see how deep this went. That's when I found something that made my stomach drop. In some of the movement logs, files I pulled from the same sources I'd used for my earlier research, I spotted Epstein's full name, connected to stops at locations flagged as CIA black sites. Some of these entries went back years, but others were recent, well after his supposed death. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity or a one-off error. The pattern was deliberate, and the connections were too specific to ignore. At first, I thought I could keep this quiet and piece it together on my own. But things started to shift in ways I couldn't explain. Files I'd saved the night before were missing the next morning. I'd run a search for a document I knew existed, and nothing would come up. Sometimes I'd find a folder completely empty, even though I was sure I hadn't touched it. It felt like someone was watching what I was doing and erasing my trail as fast as I could make it. I tried harder, thinking maybe I was making mistakes, but every time I got close to something important, it disappeared. The pressure didn't stop with missing files. I started seeing my name online in places I'd never put it. Articles showed up out of nowhere, painting me as unstable and obsessed with conspiracies. One piece quoted sources close to me, but I didn't recognize any of the details. It was too coordinated to be random. The coverage didn't just make me look bad. It made it harder for anyone to believe me, even if I did decide to go public. After that, I noticed cars parked near my apartment that I hadn't seen before. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid, but the same black sedan kept appearing, always in a different spot, but never too far away. Sometimes, I'd catch someone sitting inside, pretending to look at their phone. One night, I saw the car parked right under a streetlight, engine running, windows up. The next morning, it was parked around the corner. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but the feeling that I was being watched wouldn't go away. With all of this happening, I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was reading too much into these coincidences, making patterns out of random events. I told myself I was just tired, that my mind was playing tricks on me, but every time I tried to let it go, I found another detail that made everything feel real again. The airport footage had checked out. The travel logs were genuine. The black site connections were right there in the data I'd pulled. Someone was going to a lot of trouble to hide something, and I was getting too close. I kept thinking about why Alex had sent me that video in the first place. Maybe he trusted me to figure it out, or maybe he knew it would draw attention and wanted someone else to take the fall. Either way, the more I uncovered, the more I realized I couldn't just walk away from it now. Somewhere along the line, I started to notice that the things I was finding weren't just being hidden. They were being erased as if they'd never existed at all. The evidence didn't just disappear. It changed, warped, and slipped out of reach the more I tried to hold on to it. At first, It was simple files, the NASA flight logs I'd saved, the notes from the airport footage, the screenshots of metadata. I'd backed them up, encrypted them, even checked and double-checked that everything was where it should be. But when I went back, entire folders were blank. Sometimes a file would open, but the contents weren't what I'd written. Dates were off, names had shifted, or whole sections were missing. It was subtle, almost like someone was rewriting my own history behind my back. The government database I used for archived footage started acting the same way. Entries I knew by heart were now tweaked in insidious ways. Details that had been there were replaced with new ones. And when I searched for the Slovakian flight, the system glitched and tossed up errors I'd never seen before. I tried not to panic, but every technical explanation I could come up with fell apart. These weren't random glitches. Someone was actively erasing and altering the trail. I thought about Alex again, how he'd sent me that first video and then vanished. I kept reaching out. Calls, texts, even old forums. No response. It was like he never existed. Finally, a friend texted, "Be careful." And that was all. It didn't sound like a warning you gave to someone chasing a dead end. It sounded like a warning you gave to someone who'd gotten too close. I started reaching out to a few colleagues I still trusted, people who knew how to follow a digital trail and wouldn't judge me for asking strange questions. The responses were different this time. Some ignored me. One cut me off the moment I mentioned Epstein or the airport footage, telling me he didn't want to know and it was safer that way. Others just stopped replying altogether. It wasn't just silence. It was a kind of fear that made them put distance between us. That's when I felt the isolation set in. I realized then that curiosity had trapped me in something bigger than me. At work, things changed too. My supervisor started asking about my recent activity, but the questions didn't match my assignments. I'd catch coworkers whispering, then going quiet when I entered the room. There were reminders about sticking to protocols, about not investigating things outside my job description. It didn't feel like routine oversight. It felt like I was being watched, and everyone else knew not to get involved. The sense of paranoia grew stronger after I got a short, cryptic email from a former colleague I hadn't spoken to in years. The message was just a few words. "Get off the grid for a while. They're watching everything." There was no signature, but when I looked up the email, I saw he'd worked in security before dropping out of sight himself. The message didn't give me any answers, but it confirmed what I'd started to suspect. This wasn't just about a few missing files or a strange video. There was a pattern, one I wasn't supposed to see. Still, I couldn't let it go. I started combing through every backup, every drive, looking for anything I might have missed. One afternoon, hidden deep in a folder I'd encrypted months ago, I found a backup I didn't remember making. Inside was a copy of the Slovakian airport footage and the metadata scan. Seeing them again made me feel a strange mix of relief and dread. The files shouldn't have survived, not with everything else disappearing. The fact that they had was proof that this wasn't just a technical issue. Someone was trying to wipe out the evidence, and I'd only just managed to stay a step ahead. That should have made me feel safer, but it did the opposite. If I'd found the backup, whoever was behind all this could find it too. The warning echoed in my mind. They're watching everything. I started to wonder if there was any way out that didn't end with me losing everything, my job, my reputation, maybe even more. By that night, every sound in my apartment felt sharper. I checked the locks twice. I kept the files close, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was carrying something I couldn't put down. The truth wasn't just dangerous. It was starting to feel too big for me to handle on my own. Epstein's death wasn't just faked. It was covered up. And the more I looked, the more I realized it wasn't just about hiding one man. It was about protecting the entire system that made his escape possible. The logs from those black site flights kept showing up in places they shouldn't have. I'd see Epstein's name or his initials listed alongside government contractors, sometimes tucked into public flight manifests, sometimes buried deep in restricted files. The patterns weren't random. It felt like someone was planting just enough confusion to keep anyone from connecting the dots. The more I tried to sort the real from the fake, the clearer it became that this was a network designed to keep secrets moving, not just people. I kept thinking about how easy it was for people in power to erase or rewrite the record. Epstein's old connections to politicians, wealthy donors, and intelligence agencies had always been out there. But now they looked different. One name in particular kept turning up in the background of the airport footage. A man had been photographed at closed-door meetings with world leaders, always in places where no cameras were allowed. When I tried to trace his movements, the trail went cold at the same black sites where Epstein's logs appeared. It was like following a thread that kept looping back on itself, always just out of reach. I thought about sharing everything I had, just dumping it all online and letting the world decide what to believe. I figured if enough people saw it, maybe someone would take it seriously. But every time I tried, the posts would disappear. Sometimes it took a few minutes, sometimes less. I'd get vague warnings about violating guidelines, or the site would crash right after I hit upload. It didn't matter if I changed the details or used a different account. The result was always the same. I felt like I was shouting into a void that swallowed every word before anyone else could hear it. That's when the isolation really started to close in. I stopped trusting the people around me. Every conversation felt loaded, like maybe someone was fishing for what I knew. At work, I caught people glancing at my screen or pausing when I walked by. Even outside, the world felt off, like I was being watched, or at least monitored, by people who knew exactly how to make someone disappear. Sometimes I'd see the same unfamiliar faces in different places, never saying anything, just there. It got to the point where I stopped going to my usual spots, just in case. I tried to get help, reaching out to a couple of people I thought I could trust. Most of them didn't answer, and the ones who did made it clear they wanted nothing to do with this. One friend said I should just drop it, that nothing good would come from digging any deeper. Another told me to be careful and then went silent. It was like everyone else could see the danger even if they didn't know the details. The worst part was realizing how easy it was for them to make things vanish. Files I'd saved would change or disappear when I checked them again. Sometimes, even my own notes looked different, like someone had gone in and rewritten them while I wasn't looking. The digital trail was being wiped out as fast as I could build it. It made me question my own memory, wondering if I was starting to lose track of what was real. I kept circling back to the airport footage. That was the one thing I still had, the one piece that hadn't changed. I watched it over and over, looking for anything I'd missed. Then almost by accident, I found another angle. A second camera that caught the same moment from a different spot. The timestamp matched, but this time I saw something I hadn't noticed before. In the background, a man in a suit was talking to someone who looked just like the same high-level contact I'd seen in other places. There was no mistaking it. The way they stood together, the way they talked, it was clear they knew each other, and it wasn't a coincidence. That second angle made everything feel more real, but it also made the decision harder. I knew what it meant to keep going, and I knew what it could cost. But what happened when I finally got a second angle on that airport footage? That's when the real choice started to take shape. One that would force me to decide how far I was willing to go to protect the truth. By this point, I knew I wasn't just someone who'd stumbled onto a strange video. I was a target. The cars outside, the erased files, the silence from people I trusted, it all made it clear that whatever I'd uncovered was dangerous enough for someone to want me gone. I kept thinking about the black sedan parked across the street, always there but never moving. The driver hidden behind tinted glass. That image stuck with me more than anything else, a constant reminder that I was being watched and that every step I took was probably being tracked. The fear was real. I'd wake up in the middle of the night convinced I'd heard someone at my door. I'd check my phone and see missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I'd open my laptop only to find folders empty, notes rewritten or whole drives wiped clean. It was the kind of fear that didn't go away, no matter how much I tried to ignore it. But every time I thought about just walking away, about packing a bag, erasing my digital footprint, and disappearing, I knew it wouldn't really make me safe. The people behind this had already shown what they could do. If I left, I'd be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life, and the truth would disappear with me. On the other side was the weight of what I'd found. If I stayed silent, the story would vanish. The conspiracy would stay buried. People like Alex would keep disappearing, and the world would go on as if none of this had ever happened. I thought about the first time I watched the beach footage. That moment when reality cracked open and nothing made sense anymore. I remembered the feeling of seeing something I was never meant to see, and how it changed everything. The longer I sat with it, the more I realized I couldn't just let it go. The cost of silence felt heavier than the risk of speaking out. I kept going back and forth, trying to convince myself that there was a way out that didn't end with me losing everything. But every argument circled back to the same choice. Disappear and let the truth die, or do something, anything, to keep it alive. I wasn't naive. I knew the odds were against me. I knew the people I was up against had more power and reach than I could imagine. But letting them win by doing nothing felt worse than any risk I could take. So I made my move. I gathered every file, every screenshot, every piece of evidence that hadn't already been wiped. Instead of trying to blast it out in one big drop, I split it up and scattered it across encrypted channels, small servers, and private groups, places they couldn't control yet. I didn't make a scene. I just left enough breadcrumbs that someone, somewhere, would start asking questions, would notice the gaps, would see the cracks. If they wanted to erase this, they'd have to chase down 1,000 scattered fragments. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was the best shot I had. As I was about to finish, I paused on one last frame from the Slovakian airport footage. The man near Epstein, the one with the briefcase, turned just enough for his face to catch the light. I recognized him from photos tied to major finance events, the kind that only made headlines if you knew where to look. He wasn't hiding. He was making sure he was seen, like he wanted to send a message. It hit me then that Epstein wasn't the only secret. The real story was how easily these people could move in plain sight, protected by a system built to erase anyone who looked too closely. With my files scattered like breadcrumbs, I closed my laptop and waited for what came next. The real shock wasn't the footage itself. It was seeing how fragile truth can be when someone wants it gone. Watching evidence disappear, seeing people get silenced, and feeling doubt creep in made me realize how easy it is for those in power to rewrite what everyone accepts as real. If truth can be manufactured, what else have we taken for granted? Remember, Epstein's death was officially confirmed in 2019. Everything you've heard here is part of a fictional exercise in what-ifs. If you saw evidence like this, would you chase it or run? If this made you question what's real, subscribe and share your thoughts below. This is a fictionalized story created for entertainment.